This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 489 of the Late Round Podcast, one of many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Travis Etienne had his pro day on Thursday, and he weighed in at 215 pounds. That was like 10 to 15 pounds more than I expected. I plugged that new weight into my model, and bam, Etienne became the RB1 in the model, ahead of Javonte Williams and Najee Harris. Now, I tweeted about this change, and I had some responses from people who were confused. One person mentioned that it seems crazy that 10 pounds could change someone's rank that much. And someone else mentioned that they had thought that I said that Najee Harris met all the requirements in my model, so why wouldn't Harris be the RB1? So let me address those things before getting into the questions this week, because I think that they're both valid questions. First off, with modeling, we're working with the information that we have. I'm not able to weigh Travis Etienne every day of his life to see how his weight fluctuates. And I can't do that with every other running back. I have to use the same process for him that I use for everyone else. And that process has shown to matter. Now, is there a subjective red flag in my mind about Travis Etienne's weight? Yeah, sort of. There have been interviews with Etienne where he talks about playing in the 200 to 210 pound range, and that's less favorable than the 215 pound weigh-in. But my model has him where it has him because that's the information that we have, and BMI does matter for running backs. I'll talk about that with a question later on. To the question about Najee Harris, if you listened to the show a handful of weeks ago, then you heard that Harris was the one running back who hit every threshold for my model and how it relates to successful NFL running backs. Basically, on that show, I called Najee Harris my RB1. I still likely will have Harris as my RB1. It's not like he's far off from Etienne and Javonte Williams in my model right now. And draft capital is going to determine a lot. But keep in mind, if you listen to that episode on which draft hopeful running backs produced like studs in college, I was only referring to thresholds that were being hit by these players. Travis Etienne didn't hit a touchdown share threshold that NFL studs typically hit. But in my model, it's not binary. It's not he hits this or he didn't hit this. Etienne's touchdown share number really wasn't that bad. So it didn't knock him that much for being lower than the stud average in that category. Now, if you didn't listen to that episode, none of that probably makes sense, so go back and listen to it. I demand you. So if you had questions about Etienne after seeing my tweet, I hope this clears things up. As always, my model is a guide for me. I don't blindly rank off of it, especially when prospects are ranked incredibly close in the model. Before getting into the questions this week, March Madness is almost underway, and there's no better place to bet on college basketball than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, FanDuel is offering college basketball parlay insurance. Place a 5+ leg parlay on college basketball, and if you hit on all of the legs except for one, you get up to $25 back in site credit. So go check it out over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Must be 21 years or older and present in Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan, 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Virginia, Tennessee Redline, 1-800-889-9789, or visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia. That's a mouthful. Let's get to these questions. This first question says, can you give us your thoughts on the Lions wide receiver situation and how it would affect TJ Hockenson? Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's pretty straightforward at the moment. The Lions are very thin at wide receiver, and they're most definitely in rebuild mode. Hockenson is currently the only reliable pass catcher on that team. So at the moment, we're looking at a really strong target share for TJ Hockenson in 2021. And that's not really dependent upon what they do from here through the rest of the offseason. Like, they're going to take a player or two from this loaded wide receiver class, I'm sure. But even that, given the fact that they'll be rookies, even that shouldn't hinder Hockenson's target share potential all that much. The real issue for a player like Hockenson, or really anyone else in the Lions, is the fact that they're probably not going to be very good. That offense has a lot of potential issues. And when offenses are bad, that generally comes with poor fantasy results. Now, I'm not saying I'm fading Hockenson or DeAndre Swift. I don't really know right now where I stand with them in terms of redraft. But I do think that the Lions could be pretty bad this year. And that'll turn me off of those guys in some way, even if volume is there. This next question is from @Dean0Toll1. In a lot of your podcasts, you touch lightly on college players declare early or late and say this is a pro and or con. Are you able to expand on this, please? Keep up the great work. Thanks. Yeah, so at wide receiver especially, there's data that suggests that being an early declare is good. My friend Rich Rebar from sharpfootballanalysis.com, who I reference all the time on the show, he did a study last offseason on this that really shed some light at the wide receiver position in particular. He showed that of round one wideouts selected over the last 10 years, the hit rate for early declares versus non-early declares, it was very evident. According to his data, we haven't seen a non-early declare have a wide receiver one season when they represent over 26% of the sample. Meanwhile, 40% of the early declares who were drafted in the first round, they had a wide receiver one season in fantasy. So I touch on that because it matters, especially a wide receiver. And I think it makes sense. If a player is declaring early, that means he likely produced at a younger age. And when you produce at a younger age, you're likely just more talented. Players coming out early are just naturally more talented than players who need that extra year. This next question is from @Steven0128. Do you change your quarterback rankings relative to one another in a 2 quarterback / superflex league versus a 1 quarterback league? So I think this may sound like a weird question to some of you since you're still scoring points the same way at quarterback, no matter how many quarterbacks you're starting. But I think it's a good question. I'd say that my rankings don't dramatically change, but I do strive more for that ambiguity when I get to late round quarterbacks in single quarterback leagues. Maybe Jalen Hurts isn't the best example because I draft him in both formats, but we're at least a little bit unsure as to how he'll perform next year. And we don't know for sure if Philly's going to draft a quarterback or do something that would hinder Hurts' ability to start. Hurts is someone who then may be more attractive in a single quarterback league than a 2 quarterback one, because it's easier to make up for a dud in a single quarterback league. Again, I think that Jalen Hurts is a great pick no matter the format next year. This is just an example. But I think I tolerate more QB2 types in superflex leagues than I would in a single quarterback league. Because I'm leaning more into the, is he going to have the starting job for the whole year side of things? You want a little bit more safety in a superflex league, just naturally. But overall, I don't think that's going to really drastically change my rankings regardless of the league type and structure. This next question is from @WhatTheChain. What do you think about using in-game speed scores instead of combine 40-yard dash data? Yeah, I mean, look, 40-yard dash data on its own is not very meaningful. I don't use anything 40 time related in my wide receiver model. And I only have a speed score threshold that players need to hit in my running back model. That's it. That's the extent of it. Now, earlier this week, NFL Network Cynthia Freeland, she tweeted about how game speed was way more predictive for NFL wide receivers than 40 times. She noted that sub 4.41 40 times don't equate to more separation or a higher reception, first down, or touchdown rate in the NFL. And then she went on to say that, quote, far more predictive is college speed and pads by route, and best indicator of success was speed post-catch. I haven't found a whole lot of signal with 40 times. I've talked about that a lot on this show in the past. The issue is that data to get game speed, as far as I know, isn't widely available. So it's tougher to use that data. If I had the data, I would love to use it. This next question is from @WillHarper614. Thoughts on Gabriel Davis? Can he become a top 24 wide receiver next season for Buffalo? So John Brown was released by Buffalo on Wednesday, which really is going to elevate Gabriel Davis if the Bills don't add another wide receiver this offseason. Davis really saw his workload uptick when John Brown wasn't active last year. Rich Rebar, who I referenced earlier, he sent a tweet out on Wednesday noting that Davis ran a route on 289 of 298 dropbacks without John Brown last season. So he's a starter. We should expect him to be on the field a lot if nothing else changes. Can he be a top 24 wide receiver? Yeah, he can be. I think that's at least in his range of outcomes. The Bills really targeted their wide receivers at a high rate last year. Almost 75% of the team's targets went to wide receivers. That was first in the NFL and second since 2011. There's likely some regression to come from that, but the offense is sort of built around that position. So I do think that we should be giving Gabriel Davis a lot of love as a value, though I'm sure his ADP is about to rise. This last question is an email. It says, "Hey JJ, what are your thoughts on CEH for 2021? The expectations for him were huge and probably unrealistic, but it seems that he was in a perfect situation and did not perform as well as most thought he should. I understand he got injured at one point, but for a guy who was the team's first round pick in that offense, do you think his early career is showing red flags? Thanks, Jeremy." I'm not really that worried about CEH. He saw 54% of the team's running back rushes after playing just 13 games, which is a prorated running back rush share of 66%, which is, I think, right in line with expectation given his size and how we projected him to be used in the NFL. And then had he maintained his target share pace through 16 games, you're looking at an 11% target share. Those numbers are totally fine, especially in this Chiefs offense. His big issue is that he couldn't find the end zone. He had 15 carries from within the 10, and he scored once. And that one touchdown came at the goal line, where he had 9 goal line rushes. Some will say that he's just undersized, so he's just not going to be a good goal line back. But I see that as a number that he can improve on. And he ranked above the 50th percentile among 100-plus attempt runners in percentage of rushes that went 10 or more yards. But I will say he did lack big play explosion in year one. His 20-plus yard run rate was more in the 20th percentile. But overall, I don't think his backfield share numbers and how he performed numbers-wise, I don't think it was all that bad. And he looked really good at times. He just was kind of inconsistent. Expectations were just insanely high. I almost feel like he went from a tough player to draft and buy into because of that cost, all the way to one who can now be a discount because of those high expectations. This last question is from @LadyGagaDisco. What's your opinion on Terrace Marshall? Good breakout age in college dominator, but bad age-adjusted production every year. But he played with Chase and Jefferson. I'm very torn on him. Yeah, so I talked about Marshall in the wide receiver prospect episode, and I'm into him. As you mentioned, he played with really good competition in college. And if you look at what he did this past year, had he finished the season, he would have had really good production. And the other thing here is size. There are a lot of wide receivers in this class who run the risk of just being a slot guy, and that can limit upside. But with Marshall, even though he played a lot in the slot this past year when Justin Jefferson left, he has experience all over the field. And that makes me more bullish on him and his ceiling than some of the other big producers who project to just be slot receivers. The last question this week is from my buddy @DavisMattic. What do you make of a guy like Puka Williams with A-level production but bad size? Yeah, so earlier in the week, I talked through wide receiver BMI, and I gave my thoughts on that topic. I didn't talk about running back BMI. Now, I did earlier in this episode when talking about Travis Etienne and how it does matter. But running back BMI matters a lot more in my model than wide receiver BMI does. Generally speaking, small running backs, they don't consistently give us strong fantasy production. So Puka Williams weighing in at 175 pounds during his pro day, not great. When I input everything into my model, he's not looking good heading into the draft. There's almost zero chance that he's going to hit the 80th percentile threshold that I like to see running backs hit in my model. And it's just not something that we see. Since 2000, only one running back who weighed 175 pounds or less has given us more than 30 fantasy points, according to a stathead.com query that I ran. One running back. One running back has given us more than 30 PPR points in a single season at 175 pounds or less. And that was Dexter McCluster. Now, you may be thinking that I just did what I said not to do on the wide receiver BMI episode, because I'm just looking at the numerator here, not the denominator. And that's true. But considering number one, BMI seems to matter more at running back, and number two, Puka isn't even the best prospect in my model with that kind of weight over the last decade or so, that's why I'm not into him. And you could even consider this. Even if Puka Williams is some outlier, which I don't think he is compared to like a Devontae Smith at wide receiver, but even if he's some outlier, then you're still taking on that risk. There's still a risk involved. Maybe draft capital will help him, but I think there's a small chance that he ends up being fantasy relevant. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and I will talk to you next week.